I'm Jacqueline, and this is Murder Makers. Last episode, we discussed what it's like going through the criminal justice system. This episode, we're going to be discussing what happens after the criminal justice system, which is prison. Prison is a place for rehabilitation. It's a part of our society where hurt people who have hurt people go to recognize past mistakes, heal, reset, and when they leave, set out to build a brighter and better future with the tools they have gained in prison. Unfortunately, this is not usually the case in prison. Prison creates an environment where it is a high intensity of people who are hurt and dealing with a lot of trauma and things going on in their life. And instead of healing from those things and resolving their issues, they instead hurt the people around them. This further traumatizes themselves and others and does not aid in their rehabilitation. It instead creates an unsafe environment for them and those around them. Who come to prison are usually not educated or have a lesser education than someone who's unlikely to go to prison, and this usually has something to do with their crime. The lack of education makes it hard for them to get a job, which pushes them into poverty, which pushes them into crimes, which pushes them into prison. So for them to be able to break the cycle, education is a necessary component. Now, about 80% of prisons offer a high school education or an alternative path like a GED. But most prisoners don't use these programs. Similarly, with secondary education like college credits, vocational training, things like that, they're offered to prisoners, but they opt out of them due to their lack of understanding for the importance of them, the stigma of admitting that they don't have a high school education, that they don't have a college, they're not knowledgeable in a trade, which is quite sad considering that in most cases, a high percentage of the people that they're around also don't have that knowledge. A lot of people in prison also have a lot of mental health issues or stigma or trauma around their mental health. Around 70% of prisons provide a mental health services, with the norm in prisons being that there is a mental health screening at the beginning. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't do as much as we would hope it would, because what you would hope for would happen would people would be screened for their mental health illnesses when coming into prison. Then in prison they would get the care they need, be on the medication they need, and once leaving prison they would be healthier, happier, more mentally stable people, which would reincarceration rates. But unfortunately, what happens in most cases is they're screened for mental illnesses. They're either not found, they hide them, or their mental illnesses are found, but it's not ignored, but it isn't seen with importance because it's unfortunately so common in the prison system that when someone has serious mental health issues, it's the norm, and because of the lack of resources, not much can be done. And in most cases, people have to want to change, and unfortunately, in most cases, they don't want to change because out of fear, out of it's their safety net, out of stigma, When you are living in a place with people every day for years on end, and your sole goal is survival, you're not trying to rock the boat by going to a professional, which the other people you're living with will see as they live in that same communal space. They see where you go, they see where you walk, they pick up on those things, and they will know if you're talking. And part of that also is, if you are receiving therapy, you're talking to someone, and that carries a certain air about it, because that means that if you see or know about things going on in the prison, then you could potentially be snitching to this therapist, and they don't want that. And people don't want to be known as a snitch because they're truly just trying to survive in this place. It doesn't set up an environment for people to thrive. It doesn't even set up an environment necessarily for people to recognize what they have done to land in prison, to make a plan on what they're going to do with their life after prison, and to properly do that. 2/3 of people who require mental health treatment don't receive mental health treatment. So that means that prisons become a hotspot for people who are really struggling. Made a lot of poor choices, which, even if they don't want to admit that, for the most part causes them to have a lot of regret. They don't have the same. Outside of prison, you can hide from certain aspects of your world because you can use things like drugs, you can use things like your phone, even shopping gives you a hit of dopamine. In prison, there are no additional sources of dopamine, so it really forces you to face your reality, which is really scary. So all of these things are forcing people to face their reality with a bunch of other people all surrounding them, causing a lot of really big emotions to happen, and those emotions most likely being taken out on other people. There's unfortunately cases as well of abuse inside prisons, particularly in women's prison. There's a high volume of women in women's prisons who are either there because of a crime related to sexual assault, or have been sexually assaulted that caused them trauma, and then that led them to spiral, or some event happened in their life that then caused them to commit the crime that they're ultimately in prison for. Then they go to prison where there is a large number of male officers who at times abuse their power because they are in a position of power, and that might be, unnecessarily patting them down, aggressively patting them down, making sexually lewd comments, or it might be sexually assaulting them or raping them in some cases. The environment that is created in prison doesn't allow for people to grow, become better, have the tools to recognize and acknowledge their pain and be able to move forward with their life. It's no wonder that we find such high rates of reincarceration, because what we're doing is we're not teaching, we're not providing resources. What we're simply doing is we're putting people in timeout. We're putting people in timeout. But unlike timeout, where they have time to cool down and be able to process their emotions, these people are in an emotionally heightened state the entire time they're in prison because they feed off of each other. And so when we wonder why there's so much crime and reincarceration rates are so high and why prison is the $1 billion business it is, it's because it is a business. It doesn't serve its purpose, which is to help hurt people heal and to bring justice while also bringing healing. It doesn't do that. And my interview with Ken Berry, who is a former incarcerated individual, truly shines a light on that. Hello, Ken. So today I'm here with Ken Berry, who is currently a lawyer but has quite the interesting backstory. So, Ken, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your early life was like?
Well, I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. Um, Always wanted to be a police officer when I was coming up. One of my little league baseball coaches was a police officer, and that made me want to go into that profession. Also took a street law class in high school that really made me have a thirst for law, and so that's what led me into the legal field.
Before going to prison, were you getting an education to become a police officer?
Well, yeah, I was a criminal justice major, and at a local at Chicago State University, and I was also working with the University of Chicago campus police. The University of Chicago has their own police force with full police powers that police the Hyde Park area of the city of Chicago. So I was working that job and I was going to school at the same time. And while I was working with the university police, that's when I got arrested for a crime I didn't commit and ultimately ended up in prison.
What was your reaction like to being accused, and what was that experience like for you?
Almost undescribable. I mean, I had always been taught and learned that innocent people, don't go to jail, don't go to prison or anything like that. So I was very naive, thinking that, okay, I know that I didn't do this, so I don't have anything to worry about. But, that's the theory of the criminal justice system. That's not necessarily the practice of the criminal justice system.
So, what were you thinking and feeling throughout your trial?
I was the lawyer that I had during my trial was incompetent, and he didn't know anything about what really transpired on October 31st, 1991. So I was trying to have a consultation with my lawyer to give him information while the trial was going on. So it was very stressful to say the least.
Do you think that that incompetent lawyer was one of the main reasons for you ending up in prison?
Oh, it was absolutely one of the main reasons. I mean, because because of his incompetence and because the full story wasn't told, the jury heard a version of the story that was totally not true and could have easily been rebutted, but that was the only thing that they had. So that's what they went with.
What did it feel like to get sentenced to prison?
Um, well, I mean, I almost passed out. I mean, I was 22 years old, and they sentenced me to 35 years in prison, and my knees literally buckled when the sentence was pronounced.
So, what were your first few weeks in prison like?
Um, extremely, extremely scary. I knew that I was in a abnormal society, so to speak, and I had to learn how things went in this abnormal society. So it was extremely scary, and I was also doing as much as I could to learn how things went within the prison.
After your first few weeks, what became your daily routine in prison?
Well, the 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 first thing that I did was I realized that the law is what put me in prison, and I realized that the law is what was going to free me from prison. So I immediately wrote letters to the law library manager so that I could be in that area. I needed to learn the law. So he hired me, gave me a job running the copy machine, but that gave me access to the law library. So anytime the library was open, I got to go to the library. So that was my routine. I went to the library every day, read as many law books as I can so that I could understand the process, understand what had happened to me.
Was it hard for you to get access to the law library when applying for the job?
Well, once I when I wrote the letter to the library manager, and I let him know that I was, a college graduate, I had my associate's degree, let him know what my background was. He hired me right away.
Were Was it common for prisoners to have access to the law library?
It was common, but not as often as I got access because I was a library worker. Anytime the library was open, whether I was working my shift or not, I could always get over there.
Gotcha. What was the process like for you to get out of prison?
Well, once I got a really clear and great understanding of what happened to me, um, I started seeking out help. And I put together a packet that said innocent man seeks chance to prove innocence. And I sent this packet out to all of the major law firms in Chicago and Peoria and in Springfield. And Winston Strawn in Chicago responded, and that was the beginning of the pendulum starting to swing my way.
So, after you got in touch with Winston and Strawn, what was the process like to get out of prison?
Well, the process was what you call a federal habeas corpus petition, and you file this petition with the federal court, letting them know that your trial was an unfair trial, and let them know the reasons why it wasn't an unfair trial, and also putting together the evidence that would have shown that you were innocent. That was prepared in that petition as well. So we put together that petition. It took about 2.5, 3 years for that to come to fruition. And once we had an evidentiary hearing, the judge agreed with us that my lawyer was incompetent and didn't I didn't have a fair trial.
So, after it was determined that you didn't have a fair trial, were you free?
Um, I was not free right away. What they did was once the order came down, they transferred me from the actual state prison back to the Cook County Jail because the court's order was you either release him in 90 days or you retry him. So as a result, I went back to the county jail, and my family got a chance to post bail for me, and they posted bail, and on December 23rd, 1999, I was released from prison.
What was it like getting out of prison?
And it was amazing being free, but it was also scary as well be- because just I had been used to being in prison, so I had to make an adjustment again to being free. And also I had a new trial, another trial that was pending. So I had to work with Winston and Strawn to prepare for that as well.
A lot of prisoners mention suffering from PTSD after being released from prison. Did you experience any of that?
That's it's hard for me to say whether I did or not. The way things went with me after went back to trial and I was exonerated with everything that was going on with my family and my parents. My mom got sick and my father got sick, and I had to assume the breadwinner position like I had before I was incarcerated. So I didn't have a chance to say, woe is me. I had to jump right back in the saddle and start providing for the family again.
So, after your criminal trial, were your charges removed from your record?
Yes, everything has been expunged from my record.
Was it hard getting a job after prison with the gap in your resume?
Actually, it wasn't. The lawyers at Winston knew that I was a quote unquote jailhouse lawyer. So one of the lawyers that worked on my case called me a few months afterwards and said that the firm had a position open for a litigation paralegal and she thought I should apply for it. And I applied for it, and I've been working at the firm, for 24 years now.
So, after leaving prison and now being a lawyer, what is your perspective on criminal justice? Do you think that prison provides it?
Well, m- what happened with me in prison is not the ideal or normal story on the way things happen inside the prison. Um, I showed my own initiative to take college classes, to take programming, to do everything I could do that was positive inside the institution. That's typically not the case. And unfortunately, a lot of programming that I was able to take advantage of doesn't exist anymore inside the institution. I think that education and programming should be one of the main things that goes on in the prison because that's the one thing. The more education you receive, the more programming you receive, the lower the return to prison rate is. And that should be what we all want is to stop people from the revolving door syndrome, so to speak, where they just keep going in and out of prison.
Do you think the prison itself creates that culture of it being a revolving door?
Um, in some ways, it definitely does, because I mean, prisons right now. I mean, prisons is big business. I mean, there are a lot. They provide a lot of jobs for a lot of people, and if the prisons were provided the education the way that I think that they should, they would stop people from coming in and out of prisons, and there would be less prisons, and there would be less jobs, and that's unfortunate.
You said early on in the interview that you originally wanted to be a cop. Has your views on the police changed since your interactions with them?
Um, is Yeah, yes and no. I I know a lot of police officers, and I know a lot of police officers that do a great job. I also know that there are some police officers that shouldn't be police officers. They shouldn't have that authority that they have. Um, so, I mean, I'm still a law enforcement guy, but I do believe in law enforcement reforms, and I'm totally against the uh, racist things that many of us have seen that go on in the criminal justice system and with police officers specifically.
Do you think there are any safe holds that can be put in place to prevent what happened to you happening to others?
Well, there's a lot of safe holds in place already. It's just a matter of whether people use them or not. For me, my lawyer was incompetent, and I think that the the prosecution and I think that the judge, they all knew, I think, that he was incompetent. And even though everybody should be out to get justice, that's also something that's in theory. In practice, many times the prosecutors want a conviction, but justice should be the primary goal for them and the judges. So in my particular situation, I think that somebody should have spoken up and said, look, this lawyer isn't doing his job. And in order for the system to work properly, everybody has to do their job the right way.
Did your prison experience change your perspective on life?
It definitely opened my eyes to uh, a great deal of things that I was very naive to. Just mm, when we talk about the theory and the day-to-day practice of the criminal justice system, I mean, that's one thing. Um, Number two, I mean, in prison, I mean, you would never think that you would meet great people, and I met some of the greatest men that I've ever met in my life in prison, and you wouldn't normally think that that would happen. And also, my outlook and my mentality has definitely evolved and done a lot of changing as well.
Well, thank you for your time, Ken, and for your sharing your experience and personal story. Thank you for listening to this episode of Murder Makers, where we discussed what it's like to be in prison, the issues around the prison system, and talked with Ken Berry about what his experience was like in prison. Thanks for listening.